today. So we're very excited for our webinar today. We're going to talk about geospatial analytics. But before we get started, I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping items. So right now, you've probably noticed that you are on mute. That's just so we can avoid background noises that may distract you from listening to the webinar. But we do, of course, want to encourage active participation. So if you have a question at any point during the webinar, just type it into the question box at the bottom right-hand side of your webinar screen. We'll monitor these questions and we'll answer as many of them as possible. We'll also be live tweeting throughout the webinar, so feel free to join in the conversation online by following us at Analytics8. And I also want to quickly introduce our speaker today, Trey Bain. So Trey is a senior sales engineer here at Analytics8. Trey helps companies turn their data into an asset, and he specializes in geospatial analytics, location data prep, and product development. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Trey.
Thanks, Tracy, and yes, everybody, thanks for joining us. I've been really excited about doing this webinar since we started talking. This is kind of my bread and butter where I spend a ton of time, and I love having the opportunity to get people more ready to start working with their data and location enabling their information. So let's kind of go through what we're going to talk about today. You know, looking at your data spatially can give you a whole lot of new insights into how your business works. But when we bring this up, we often hear companies say that their data is not location enabled. We want to discuss some of the challenges to getting that data location enabled and discuss some scenarios where we've seen companies that have overcome challenges associated with it and used location analytics to give them new insights into their business. So first, let's kind of talk about how adding location data to your business data adds value. Something I really like about this slide is that not only does it go through how adding the data, location data to your business data adds value, but it also does it in an order that I typically see customers go in to use location data. So the first time someone starts thinking through this, they decide they want to get a map. And they tend to put their customers on that map. They want to see where clusters of customers are. This helps them plan marketing campaigns or future expansions. This information can be really valuable, but unfortunately, this is where I see a lot of customers stop with their location analytics. You can do a whole lot more if you just take a little fewer steps, put a little bit more effort into it. So after somebody's got their customer base onto a map, what they really want to do is start visualizing the relationships between their data. You know, how far do materials travel to get from a warehouse to a retail location? Or are your sales territories distributed efficiently? You know, relationships you have in a table look entirely different than they do on a map. I have a demo that I show pretty regularly during the sales process that shows exactly that. You have a table where you have customers who are associated with sales offices. And when you're looking at them, it looks fairly evenly distributed, where your customers seem to line up quite nicely with your salespeople. When you turn around and put that onto a map, you find customers who are traveling great distances to get to the sales office when another one is really close. When you start putting those relationships in your data into something like a map, you can see things in a way that you've never seen them before. Another benefit you get from location enabling your data is removing blind spots in a different way. You know, it's often easy to find bad data when you're using a good BI tool. That's because bad data leads you down a discovery path that usually doesn't make sense. Missing data, on the other hand, is really hard. If you try to look at it on a spreadsheet, unless you really go hunting for it or know that it's missing, you can't find it because it's missing. A good example of where I've seen this work with location data is I was working with an internet service provider. The project that I was working on was trying to give service to people in rural areas. While they were doing that, they decided to put two different pieces of information on the map. One was going to be the coverage area that they had and looking like a polygon. Another one would be putting their billing information, so the homes that were paying the bills. What they found throughout their entire data set were holes where they were getting billing information, but they didn't have coverage, or at least their data said they didn't have coverage. Come to find out, the company had been operating for years with incomplete information about what their coverage area was. That's not what the project was about, but simply by location enabling their data, looking at it on a map, they were able to find holes and blind spots in their data that were affecting everywhere else in the entire company. Location data also lends itself very well to adding external data. I talk to customers who are buying competitive information, excuse me, for their business. Whenever you look at location data, though, things like demographics, consumer spending, weather data, crime, all of that fits very nicely into location analytics. The neat thing is if you know where to look, things like demographics, weather, crime, a lot of that stuff is available at no cost. Just having a location expert on hand who can help you find that information can help add to your data story. So, if location enabling is so great, why are more and more companies not doing it? Well, the fact is that until recently, geospatial work was just really hard. It was so hard, in fact, that very few companies put forth the effort to store the data in a location-friendly way. Customer data was stored in a data warehouse, while your Esri shapefiles or KML files were kept at arm's length from everyone except the ArcGIS team. And even if you could get your hand on it, converting it and using it in a BI tool was something like black magic. Another common problem is data cleanliness. Companies will spend hours and hours making sure sales data is correct, but never think twice to see if Johnny Smith really lives at 123 I don't give out my address drive. It's because location information, like any other, is only as good as the source data that we provide it. We actually find that roughly 30% of all address data is inaccurate and needs to be corrected before it can be useful. A note here, cleaning up poor data is not something that software alone can do. You'll hear me talk about this a couple of times during this webinar, that the problems that we're running into, the challenges with location enabling, and the solutions are rarely a software-only problem. Having someone who can think through it, using understanding how location data works, understanding what it takes to clean up that data, can drastically improve your odds of getting a location-enabled app without spending a ton of time and a ton of money doing it. Now, once your location data is accurate, the next step is learning what it tells you about your business. I was working with a bank that wanted to see why customers from a particular branch were disappearing. They were customers, and then all of a sudden they were leaving in droves. When they were looking at this from just a data perspective, looking at it on bar charts and tables, they noticed that a particular branch was losing a whole bunch of customers with no inclination to why. We took those customers in that branch and we put it on a map. And what we found is that the customers that were leaving all seemed to be clustered in a general geographical area. We then took and found optimized routes that would get those customers from their homes and places of work to the bank branch. And when we did that, we found that many of the customers were driving through a corridor that had a number of competitors. Upon further investigation, using some of the tools that I'll show you later on, like Google Street View, they were able to find out that many of their competitors had easier access ATMs, quicker drive-throughs, things like that, that were pulling away their customers that didn't want to travel the distance and go through the effort of keeping their business intact. Another thing to consider is another hurdle that people run into is often these massive amounts of data, or at least they think it's a massive amount of data until we really start investigating it and putting it in perspective. One of the first questions I ask a customer when building a proposal is how many rows of data they want on a map. Often I hear something like 4 million, which is funny because I really do hear the number 4 million a whole lot. I have kids at home and they've through the years come up with what quantifies a big number for them. My son is 10, 1 million is a huge number for him. So anytime he's trying to express a big number, he uses 1 million. In the location arena that I work in, 4 million seems to be that magic number. Usually though, when digging in and looking a little bit closer, what they're really saying is they have 4 million transactions. They only have about 500,000 addresses or something to that effect. It's really important to start figuring out how many unique addresses you're going to have. That's going to help quantify the effort to get those addresses geocoded or to find out what kind of aggregation you need to do. Because the fact is that when you're aggregating data, if you're trying to show more than a couple thousand points on a map at one time, you probably need to aggregate the data. So whether you're struggling on best ways to present data or load data or collect data or store data, having the right person to help is important. Having someone who understands how to best present and use location analytics can really help bring that data to life. I was reminded of this the other day when I was showing a feature in a mapping solution that we sell to a client. The client had bought our product over a year ago, and we're struggling to find ways to be able to use it. What I showed them was this Google search functionality where they can take and plot anything they want to, anything from a Google search onto a map. He indicated this would really change the way they were doing business because many of their customers were asking for to put some context around their data. Their business tended to do well around grocery stores, and being able to look for grocery stores in the vicinity around them would drastically change how they deployed products into their stores. They had had this product for over a year and hadn't really made sense of it because they didn't have somebody in who understood it. This goes back to this idea that when you're working with location data, consider more than the software package you're looking at, and think about the people you have and the resources you have to be able to enable that solution. So if enabling location data is so great, but there are some challenges, what are we going to do to overcome those? Well, the fact is that every project is a little different, but there are some questions that you can ask yourself up front that if you prepare for those, it's going to make the entire project go a whole lot smoother. Many of these are the ones that we ask our customers whenever we go in and put a plan together to location enable their data. So start thinking through some of these. At the end, if you have some questions that you want specifically around some of these, I'd encourage you to put them into the question box so that we can go through them. So first, make sure that you have a geospatial strategy tied to your business goals. I see this a lot in demos where I will show a really nice looking map. Somebody on the call will think, that's what I need because it's pretty and shiny, when in reality, they don't quite have a business strategy tied to that. You're going to want to look at the specific questions that you need to answer. You know, what markets have your highest concentrations, or what markets might not be a good fit for the services you provide. You know, both are location questions, but require a different kind of analysis to get to an answer. Consider who will be the user and what they'll do with the data. Does your sales team need to target certain customers, or does your asset management team need to keep track of a particular asset? Once they find it, what do they need to do about it? Do they need to take action immediately in the application they're in, or do they need to go back to some sort of central system? We have a number of solutions that we worked out for our customers that do both. You'll see some of them later on today. Also, is this a department or a company-wide initiative? You know, this can define how large of a data set you need to location enable, going back to that 4 million transaction question, and what kind of questions might be important to answer. You know, a department might want to keep track of a single line of business, while a company-wide initiative may want to see business at a global level. Go ahead and take stock of the existing data you have. You know, we've talked a lot about geocoding or location enabling your addresses, making sure they're clean. But find out, do you have addresses or do you have latitude and longitude? What of it is readily accessible? I've run into a number of companies that even if they want to location enable their data, they simply don't have access to, for example, the postcodes or the custom sales territories that they need. Or address information is stored in a different data warehouse that they don't have access to. Look at how many points that you need to plot. As I mentioned, if you have more than a few thousand, we're probably going to need to figure out a way to aggregate them. Whenever you aggregate things, you can look at aggregating it by a postcode or by a state, or even by something more customized, like a hexaben that represents a generic space on a map. Figuring out how you're going to aggregate that and what's okay and what you need to drill through is going to make it easier when we get to location enabling an application. Determine how you want to show addresses. More often than not, you come into a project with the idea that you're going to show the rooftop latitude and longitude, so exactly where a customer might be or where a warehouse might be. But in some industries, that's not allowed by law, especially when you're working with healthcare. You need to find some way to roll that up to something like a city or to a state or to a postcode. Understanding what those legal requirements are to roll up the data can help us figure out how to find the city locations or the postcode locations that you'll need to represent your data. Standardize and filter that data. Many times addresses come in that aren't formatted correctly. As I mentioned, roughly 30% of what we see turns out to be poorly constructed addresses that need to be cleaned up before we can visualize them. Also making sure that things like your field names are named the same when you're talking about a street or a postcode or a zip. Lastly, you're going to evaluate if you need any additional data sources. What typically comes to mind is your demographic type data. If you need any of that, a lot of that's available for free from our government if you know where to look for it. But another part of this is, do you need any shapefiles to be able to represent territories that you want to show? That might be a KML file or a shapefile. Do you need any tools to be able to convert that to something that your business intelligence tool can handle? Understanding what you have access to and what you don't have access to is going to help us put a plan together to location enable your data. So we've talked about, why you should location enable, some of the challenges, some of the things you should consider before embarking on this so that we can overcome those challenges. Now, what I thought we should do is put together or show you how some organizations that we've worked have done that in a practical way. They've overcome those challenges and they've implemented something. Got a couple of things that I want to show you here in real applications. So let's start off talking about Natera. Natera is actually a company that I'm working with right now on a project. And what they wanted is they wanted a way for their sales team to go into the field, find out where that salesperson was at that very moment, find all the customers that were within a 30-mile radius of it, find out contextual information about those customers. For example, what was the last sale they did? Who were the doctors there that they needed to speak with? And then whenever they leave that office, be able to update information about their visit so that the next salesperson could be ready for it. I figured this would happen where things would log out. Bear with me here, I'll log back in. So what I've got here is an application, the application that we actually built for Natera. Now I've got it shaped like this very intentionally because they're going to be using it on a mobile device. And I want you to see kind of what they're going to be working with. Now, because I'm working on a computer, there are some inherent limitations about what I can show you because it's not going to automatically geolocate. I'm not on a computer. So I'm going to have to fake this a little bit. I'm going to select California. So we can zoom down to California. I'm going to look at the map itself. And this is kind of the view that they would get if they were starting with on an actual device itself. This pin would represent where they were. So what they were going to do is they'll go down here and they'll click on the radial. What the radial does is it picks a 30-mile radius around the area for customers that fit within it. You can see visually that there are some points in it, but to make this easier, we can click on this little line here and we can actually select those points and zoom down to the area. Now, by doing this, they can click on the points and get information in the pop-up. In the production application, the pop-ups are a little more sophisticated than this, but this gives you an idea of what they're looking at. Now, once they go in with this information, they talk to the customer, they need a way to come back out and document what they found. A real simple way to do this would be for them to select the area and go back to this write back extension that writes back to their database. So here they can come in and they can say, talk to customer, go back next week, and save that directly back to their database so they can update in real time. Doing so will actually go ahead and update the map as well. So let's go back and let's talk about the next company that we worked with. This is actually one of the more fascinating projects that I've worked with. They're a company called StreetGreen. Right now they're in mobile advertising, but based off of some of the things they're doing, it would not surprise me if they didn't start trying other things based off of the data that they have and the things that we've put together for them. The idea here is they talked to some of the larger trucking companies and wanted to find out from those trucking companies the routes that they typically drove. Then they wanted to pick a customer. Let's just say Wendy's. We can use them as an example, a fast food chain. So they wanted to find how many Wendy's were within a 5-mile corridor of any of the routes that were being driven by a truck. This is essentially like the radial that we looked at inside of Natera, except this time we're using routes instead of using points. By doing that, they would then go back to Wendy's and say, hey, Wendy's, we have trucks, we have 5 trailers that will drive past 387 stores that will result in 7,096 drive-bys. For the cost of $29,000, you can go and advertise on this truck. And every person that this truck drives past that are within these 387 Wendy's are going to see advertising for your stores. What's fascinating for me with this is when they came to us, they had KML files that were not compatible with the application, not KML line files. They had customer data, but it was incomplete, so we had to find more customer data for them by querying outside sources and doing searches for Wendy's. Then we had to go in and we had to find out a way to be able to query distance from a long line that covers thousands of miles. All of that information is not something they had. We had to create a process in place to automatically update that information. The next application I'm going to show you, I thought was a really creative solution to a company that did not have the data they needed to do the deep analysis they really wanted to. With this, they had, for example, they understood how many potential sales they could make in a given county, and they knew how many sales they had made in that county. What they wanted to find out is they wanted to find out how many people they still could sell to based off the total volume. But they wanted to do that based off of distance. It's probably easier just to show you an application. So let's go look at this. I'll jump over. I do have to log back in again. Go ahead and click that over here on these two while we're at it. You guys don't have to wait next time. So with this company, what they had is they had, looking at the table on the left, the potential sales that they could make inside of a county. So the potential places where they could make a sale. And then on the right-hand side, they had the number of, the percentage of those that fit within a 30-mile, a 40-mile, a 50-mile, or a 60-mile population. The problem is, like I said, they didn't have individual addresses. All they had is a total to work from. So let me show you how they did that, how we did this math. Interesting here is, notice that we have the table before we've done anything on the map itself. That's because the analysis did not require the map. I think a lot of times people think spatial analysis have to include a map in order to work. That's not really true. We can do spatial analysis without ever putting things on a map. But here, for example, I've got a single one of their dealers. And remember, we have the total number of potential sales that are within each one of these counties. If we draw a radial, or radials around this point, we have our 30-mile, 40-mile, 50-mile, and 60-mile radial. With this, you can take something, for example, like Chesterfield County. And we can see that in Chesterfield County, we have a part of it that's within the 50-mile radial, and part of it that's within the 60-mile radial, and part of it that is not within any part of it. So if we come over here and we look at the table itself, we can see that in the 50-mile, in Chesterfield, there's a total of 45,948 potential sales. In the 50-mile radius, there's only 804. You can see that's a very small portion of it right here. There's 15,817 in the 60-mile. Now, to be clear, I wish the data was more accurate here, right? I wish that we had individual addresses. I wish that when we were talking about our potential sales, we knew exactly who those people were. Unfortunately, that can be really difficult. But if your potential salespeople are looking at farmers, being able to Google search for those farmers, find out how many of them are in our county is much easier than being able to find each individual one. Getting the percentages is a rough way of being able to find your penetration without having the full set of data that you wish you had. So another problem that we see customers that run into often is how to realign custom territories on the fly. If you don't know what custom territories are, this is not a big deal to you. If you do, this is a constant pain point for you. So when we think about custom territories, we're thinking about whether or not a sales team is going into a certain area or a distribution market is covering a certain area. I was working with an insurance company the other day that was looking at what their market was for products that they could offer. Whenever you build custom territories, at least in the past, it was a very manual process of stitching together areas and then rerunning a whole bunch of queries to find out how that change impacted your overall business model. Something that we've learned in this process is how to do some of that on the fly. To give you an example here, let's look at the West territory over here. We can see that in the West territory, we have 16.6% of our sales come out of the West. What if we were to move Texas into the West territory? We can, in the past, to do that, we would have had to log in, we would have made changes to a SQL database, and then rerun a big query and wait for it to run for a long time. Here, though, what we can do is we can move it to the West on the fly. Oops, sorry, you can save. And we can see that Texas has now been moved over to the West. We can also see that the rest of our sales information and other parts of the application have been updated. Now, then the Midwest accounts for 25.6% of our business. So as you can see, it's really easy now to realign those sales territories, and a little bit more work can actually automate this so that you don't have to do it manually at all anymore. So the last two areas that I want to look at is, well, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So how can we use points on a map to make it a little more intuitive? You know, most of the time when customers get a map for the first time, what they want to do is they want to just throw all of their customers on a map. They all have the same color, they all do the same thing, they're all the same size. In reality, you can use points to represent different kinds of data. You don't have to use icons, which is kind of the default behavior that many people go to. Let me drill down because I've lost track here a bit. So here is here's an area that has a number of different points. We can show different kinds of points using icons, but also notice that the markers that we've had, instead of using them in a color gradient where a darker color represents a higher volume of something, where a lower or a lighter color represents a lower quantity of sales or purchases or anything we want it to be. Here we've actually created 3 different colors based off of what kind of point it is. Here this would be customer status. You know, my current customers are beige, my delinquents are reds, and my new are blues. I was working with an insurance company the other day who wanted these to represent ICD codes. So these would actually represent the kind of injury that had occurred at a given location. What this does is instead of requiring a user to come in and make a selection so that they can see only the dots that are relevant to their query, now they can quickly identify how they relate to one another just by using the colors as codes to tell them what they mean. So the next two slides go together in kind of the same application. Because we're working with teams like Google or MapQuest with just about any solution that you've got out there, because somebody has to provide things like the base maps, the routes, the distances. Google also provides things that is very valuable. An application where someone's using that to investigate properties prior to going out and purchasing them. Going hand in hand with that, since we're reaching out and using Street View and that external data, I also want to show you how we can leverage external data and add it to the map to give you more context around the points that you're showing in your data set. Let's jump over here to my HUD Homes application. This is a fairly simple application that was put together for a realtor who wanted to look at properties that they were considering selling in a location. Interesting enough, they only have addresses. So we built a process down here for them to select the properties that they want to work with and geocode them so that they can plot them on the map. They don't actually have to go back into a backend database to do that. But once they have the points on a map, they want to find out what's going on around the area. So we pulled in net worth around the territory, around the area. So as you can see, this is coming from an external data source, but it's showing us the net worth in polygons. Now what's interesting is because we're working with HUD homes up here, many of the homes that you're looking at are sitting in low income places. But I noticed here that this particular property is not. So as I mentioned with Street View, this might be a good one to zoom into and look at the Street View of the property. This lets you see the property, see the condition of it, without ever having to drive out there to look at it. This is a dream for a realtor. In the past, they would have had to have gone out, taken the address, copied it out, gone out to Google, done a search for it, and had to find it. Here, they can do it within one unified interface. If we go and we look, though, at some of the other homes out here, there's one down here in Orangeburg, which, as we kind of expected, it's in a lower income area. Go ahead and turn that off. Also, because it's sitting further out in the middle of nowhere, anybody who he sells to, it'd be helpful if they could tell them some other things that were nearby this dot. So if I zoom in here and search here, I've actually pulled back a query in real time that will find other locations nearby within a 5-mile radius of this. This helps the realtor, so when they're pitching this property to a potential buyer, that buyer can say what's nearby, and he can talk to them about out here, there's only gas stations, churches, and car service locations. With a little bit of extra work, of course, you can get the distances from these locations as well, and drive time, or as the crow flies. And with that, we've hit the end of our presentation. I'd like to open the floor for any questions that you have. You can type them into the box. I must have done really well. No questions. Okay, if there are no questions, Tracy, I'm going to turn it back over to you for next steps.
Great, thanks so much, Trey. So just before we conclude this, a couple of next steps. So in addition to this webinar, we did put together a guide that contains some tips on how to get started with implementing geospatial analytics. So I will send an email out after this webinar that contains a link to this. We also offer data strategy meetings with one of our analytics experts, where you can discuss things like your geospatial analytics strategy, which can be really helpful if you're trying to get started. And also clickmaps.com, one of our products, there's more information there as well. So once again, thanks again for joining today, and thanks so much, Trey, for presenting. You probably, I'm not sure if anyone could tell, I definitely could not, but Trey actually ended up with strep today. So the fact that he was able to get himself out of bed and present is awesome. So thanks again, Trey. So look out for an email from me with next steps and some links to some resources. And with that, I will go ahead and conclude our webinar. So thanks again for joining, and hope that you all have a great day.